So hi everyone, my name is Remi. I'm the founder of Inco. We are a full stack privacy solution on top of existing blockchains. So today I'll be presenting this new report that we recently released with our partner Predicates. So what we did is we looked into all the existing privacy protocols that are already released and dived into their compliance, basically frameworks. And so obviously everyone here is already in the crypto space and also understands that privacy is quite necessary for adoption. So on one part, you don't want your salary details, your purchase history to be fully public. If you were to bring your business on chain, you probably don't want your revenue, your trade secrets, your sales, inventory management, etc., to also be public. And then lastly, I'll say, there has been a lot of targeting in terms of, kidnappings that happened recently, especially around crypto founders. So obviously having your bank account complete public is not a great thing. And what we can learn from Tornado Cash is, there are practical limitations of privacy without risk management. So we've seen, $455 million that has gone through Tornado Cash by the Lazarus Group. And then 2022, we had the OFAC sanctions, and also 2023, US DOJ currently charging the developers. So risk management is necessary for privacy protocols. In the traditional world, there are a host of safety, risk, and compliance mechanisms. And typically they're centralized. So everything around operations and custody are typically managed in a centralized manner. However, for decentralized protocols, we probably need a different design. And so this is really why we want to think more through a on-chain perspective, but also off-chain perspective for these enforcement models. So we propose basically this framework to reason through this entire process. And we mostly took three primary considerations. So the first part is really around the types of privacy. The second part is around compliance enforcement, so where this is enforced and how this is enforced. And lastly, it's really around the disclosure rules. So this is a pretty lengthy report, and given this is a lightning talk, I'll try to cover some of these concepts rapidly. So on the first part, the types of privacy. So by default, everything is transparent. The sender, the receiver, the asset, and the amounts. You get some pseudonymity. However, this is not perfect privacy. There are a lot of tools nowadays that can actively basically dox users and wallets. Then you have confidentiality, where you're just really hiding the amount. So you can think of it similar to like a Venmo, where you can see your friends sending money to each other, just not the amount. And then you have anonymity, where you are hiding the sender and the receiver, but perhaps the asset and the amount is public. And then you have total privacy, where everything is completely encrypted. In terms of positioning, there are privacy protocols that exist on existing public blockchains. So Tornado Cash is an example here. Or you could have a separate blockchain that's privacy-centric. And oftentimes these projects basically enforce compliance at the bridging level, which is definitely a slightly different design here. And from a compliance enforcement perspective, we can think about a couple things here. So one is, where is the compliance enforced, right? At which layer? Also, at what point in the life cycle, who is enforcing it, and what techniques are we? Like Circle's USDC contract. At the application level, this is, I would say, mostly on the front end. So, any client side, any wallets. So this is something, for example, that Railgun implements. And then you could also have compliance enforced at the blockchain protocol level, which could happen via governance. And during this entire lifecycle of transactions, you could also think about enforcing compliance, perhaps at the deposit level, at the transfer level, or the withdrawal levels. And we've seen privacy protocols basically, deciding to implement some of these compliance frameworks really at different parts of the lifecycle here. And there are also ways where you can combine some kind of off-chain with on-chain components. So in the case of Predicates, the idea is that you have a policy engine, and this policy engine can be powered by a suite of analytics tools. And so basically, Predicate will issue you some kind of on-chain attestation for you to then access certain applications. And you also have, some of these more traditional ways of KYC and KYBing off-chain, and then issuing some kind of on-chain attestation, some kind of NFT, where you can think of it almost like an on-chain passport. The risk here oftentimes is also around data exploits. And one way that the space has come up with is something called ZK identity, which is you don't necessarily have the third party store any prior information, but you're able to still prove certain information about yourself on chain via proofs. And then you have things like inclusion and exclusion based proofs, proof of innocence, or association set providers. The idea with these two approaches, they're fairly similar. It's also utilizing ZK technologies to essentially prove that you are not part of a specific list of bad actors, or you are part of a specific list of good actors. And this is obviously also gaining quite a bit of popularity nowadays. And it's also quite a clever use of technology to basically enforce this on chain. In terms of this is where we can also think about who are the decision makers enforcing these rules. Is it via a DAO, a governance, or is it based on a third party provider, or is there like an admin behind the scene that basically can also decide on these rules and update these rules, or maybe it is the asset issuer itself. The last part that I'll cover quickly here is really around disclosure rules. Essentially, who gets to see the private data? So by default, user obviously should be able to see their own balances. But can you voluntarily disclose, let's say, your transaction histories in a way that is actually voluntary, right? So that could be one design. Another design could be also having some kind of a view key or committee where this is a little bit more of an involuntary and third-party disclosure that the users are comfortable with. And the idea is that maybe upon an investigation, there are ways where there could be via governance or other means to disclose specific transactions. And then lastly, there also could be protocol level disclosures where, via governance, we can collectively agree to, decrypt something altogether. And in terms of viewing controls, we can also think of them as either predefined. So all the viewing rules are essentially locked in from the get-go, or perhaps programmable where, based on certain conditions that happens on chain, or governance upgrades, we can change some of these viewing controls as time goes. And so we apply this framework to essentially all of these popular existing protocols, and you can check out the details in the report here. And I want to say thank you for having me here. And we are definitely excited to dive deeper into this if you're interested to chat more about privacy or compliance. And you can follow us here on Twitter, and then here's my Telegram.
Thank you very much, Remi.
A little bit rushed. It is a lengthy report.
It's a ton to cover. I actually downloaded the report as soon as it was available. I reviewed it. I found it super helpful because it really kind of takes apart all the different aspects of how you can evaluate these products that provide privacy, and gives you kind of a good standard system to say how they fit across all these different criteria. And I think it's a really important contribution. Remi worked with one of our friends of PGP, Nikhil Raghavera of Predicate, to do that, I believe. And they're just two of some of the smartest people in the industry. So thank you for your work, and we appreciate you being here to explain it to us. I encourage everyone to take a look at that report.